Hello and welcome to our podcast, episode number 77, SpongeBob's Epic Adventure to Save the Secret Krabby Patty Formula. I'm Thomas, and I am here with my old friend Timothy. Tonight, we are going to talk about a film called the SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water. There will be spoilers! The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water, is a 2015 American adventure comedy film about the pirate Burger Beard stealing the secret Krabby Patty formula using a magical book. To retrieve it, SpongeBob and his friends travel to the surface world and confront Burger Beard. So, Tim, what do you think about the SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water?
Well, Tom, I have to say that I wasn't overly impressed with the SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water. It was an okay film, but I found it a bit too chaotic and nonsensical for my taste. The plot seemed all over the place, and while there were some amusing moments, they weren't enough to keep me engaged throughout the entire movie. On the other hand, I can understand why this might appeal to younger audiences or fans of the television series.
Now, Timothy, you can't just dismiss it outright. Yes, the plot is a bit convoluted, and the humor may not be for everyone, but I found it to be a delightfully zany adventure that stayed true to the spirit of the original show. The visuals were stunning, especially when they traveled to the surface world, and the addition of live-action elements added an extra layer of excitement. Plus, who doesn't love a good pirate story?
I suppose you have a point there, Tom.
But personally, I prefer my movies with a bit more structure and coherence.
It feels like they tried to cram too many ideas into one film, which ultimately made it feel messy and disjointed. The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water, just wasn't for me.
Well, I understand your perspective, Timothy, but I think it's important to remember that this movie is targeted towards a younger audience who might appreciate the wacky humor and over-the-top action more than we do. And hey, at least they managed to bring back some of the beloved characters from the show.
That's true, Tom. I just wish that they had focused more on character development instead of relying so heavily on pop culture references and random gags. But as you said, different strokes for different folks. So what did you think about the performances in the film? Did the voice actors do justice to their characters?
Well, Timothy, I thought the voice actors did a great job at bringing their characters to life once again. Tom Kenny as SpongeBob was his usual charming self, while Clancy Brown as Mr. Krabs and Roger Bumpass as Squidward were hilarious as always. I also enjoyed seeing Matt Berry as the new character, Barnacle Boy. He added a nice touch of mystery to the film. And of course, Antonio Banderas was perfectly cast as Burger Beard. He brought an air of menace and charm to the role that made him stand out among the other characters.
I agree with you on that, Tom. The voice acting was top-notch, and it really helped to bring the characters to life. However, I couldn't help but feel that some of the new characters introduced in the film didn't quite measure up to the original cast. Bubbles the dolphin, for instance, felt a bit forced, and his role in the story was rather underwhelming. And while Plankton is a classic villain from the show, I found his transformation into a muscle-bound hero to be a bit too much of a stretch.
You may have a point there, Timothy. But I think it's important to remember that this film is intended for a younger audience who might find these new elements more engaging than we do. And let's not forget about the action sequences. They were quite impressive and added a lot of excitement to the movie. The final battle between SpongeBob and Burger Beard was particularly thrilling, with both characters using their superpowers to their fullest extent.
That's true. Tom, the special effects were indeed remarkable, and the action scenes kept me on the edge of my seat. But ultimately, I feel that the SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water, tried to do too much with its storyline and ended up becoming a bit overwhelming for me. in my opinion, it would have been better if they had focused more on one or two key elements instead of trying to cram in as many gags and plot twists as possible.
Well, that's a fair assessment, Timothy. But at the end of the day, we all have different tastes when it comes to movies. Some people love chaos and zaniness, while others prefer more structured plots with less pop culture references. And that's okay. I think what matters most is that you enjoyed the film for what it was and didn't let your expectations cloud your experience.
Yes, Tom, I do agree with you there. It's important to keep an open mind when watching any movie or TV show. And who knows, maybe one day I'll give the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water another chance and find that I enjoy it more than before.
That would be great to hear, Timothy. But for now, let me ask you a question about some interesting trivia related to the film. Did you know that this is the second theatrical film based on the SpongeBob SquarePants series? The first one was released back in 2004, and it was called the SpongeBob SquarePants Movie.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So there have been two movies based on the show so far, and apparently a third one is in development. Who would have thought that a children's cartoon series would spawn such a successful film franchise?
Well, Timothy, it just goes to show how beloved the show is among fans of all ages. And speaking of the first film, it's interesting to note that there are some differences between the two movies. While both films are based on the SpongeBob SquarePants series and feature many of the same characters, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, is a more action-packed adventure with elements of live action and CG. On the other hand, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie from 2004 is more of a traditional animated film that follows a simpler storyline involving a magical book that threatens to erase Bikini Bottom from existence. Both films have their strengths and weaknesses, but ultimately they both captured the essence of what makes SpongeBob SquarePants so special: its quirky humor, lovable characters, and heartwarming messages about friendship and teamwork. In terms of trivia, did you know that the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, is actually based on a children's book called the SpongeBob SquarePants Movie? Sponge Out of Water? It was released in 2014 and serves as an adaptation of the movie itself. While there are some similarities between the two stories, there are also some notable differences. For instance, in the book version, Plankton doesn't become a muscle-bound hero or use any type of time machine to change history. Instead, he uses his usual antics to try and steal the Krabby Patty formula from SpongeBob. It's fascinating how stories can evolve over time through different mediums, isn't it, Timothy? From a humble children's book to an animated series and eventually 2 feature-length movies, SpongeBob SquarePants has certainly come a long way since its debut in 1999. And who knows what other adventures our favorite Sponge and his friends might embark on in the future.
That's a very interesting point you make there, Tom. It really is fascinating how stories can evolve over time through different mediums, and it just goes to show the enduring appeal of SpongeBob SquarePants. And speaking of the book, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, I did some research on it and found out that it actually serves as a prequel of sorts to the film. In the book, we find out that Burger Beard isn't just any pirate. He's actually an infamous buccaneer from centuries ago who was cursed to remain a ghost forever unless he can find and destroy the magical Krabby Patty formula. This motivates him to go after the formula in both the book and the film. But the story plays out quite differently between them. For example, in the book version, Plankton doesn't become a muscle-bound hero or use any time machine to change history. Instead, he uses his usual antics to try and steal the Krabby Patty formula from SpongeBob. Additionally, we learn more about how Burger Beard became cursed in the first place, which adds depth to his character.
That's a very interesting comparison between the book and the film, Timothy. It's clear that while both draw inspiration from each other, they ultimately tell their own unique stories. And speaking of differences between the two, I noticed that in the movie version, there are several references to popular culture and modern technology, such as the use of social media and superhero movies. Do you think these additions help or hinder the overall experience?
That's a good question, Thomas. On one hand, these pop culture references can be quite amusing and help to keep the film fresh and relatable for audiences who might not be as familiar with the original show. They also provide some added humor and excitement to the story. However, I agree that it could potentially alienate viewers who aren't as familiar with those references, or simply prefer a more straightforward narrative without all the extra gags. In my opinion, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, strikes a good balance between paying homage to its source material and incorporating contemporary elements that appeal to broader audiences. But what do you think? Did any particular pop culture reference stand out to you in this film, or did they all seem to blend together?
That's an excellent point, Timothy. I agree that the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, does strike a good balance between paying homage to its source material and incorporating contemporary elements. And while there were several pop culture references sprinkled throughout the film, one that stood out to me was when Burger Beard used an iPad to search for information on how to defeat SpongeBob and his friends. This felt particularly relevant as it showcased both the power of technology and its potential to be misused in a humorous way. Another reference I enjoyed was when Patrick Star dressed up as the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four comics. This not only paid tribute to classic superhero movies, but also highlighted Patrick's naivety and enthusiasm for anything related to heroism. Overall, these references added an extra layer of excitement and humor to the film without detracting from its core narrative or characters. So what about you, Timothy? Are there any particular pop culture references in the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, that stood out to you, or did you enjoy them all equally?
Well, Tom, as we've been discussing the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, I can't help but think about the actors who brought these beloved characters to life on the big screen. Tom Kenny is an absolute legend when it comes to voicing SpongeBob SquarePants, and he does not disappoint in this film. His endearing portrayal of the titular character perfectly captures his innocence and optimism despite facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. As for Clancy Brown as Mr. Krabs, I think he brings a great balance between being the loving father figure to SpongeBob and still maintaining that trademark Scrooge McDuck-like greediness.
Indeed, Timothy. It's fascinating how these actors are able to breathe life into these characters without ever actually physically appearing on screen. Roger Bumpass, who voices Squidward Tentacles, also does an excellent job of conveying the character's sarcastic wit and reluctant heroism in the film. And then there's Antonio Banderas as Burger Beard. What a fantastic choice. His charming demeanor and menacing presence perfectly complement each other, making him both lovable and terrifying at the same time.
That's very true, Tom.
I think one of the most impressive aspects about the SpongeBob movie,
Sponge Out of Water, is how well it manages to balance all these different characters and their respective arcs throughout the film. Each character feels like they get their moment to shine, which is no small feat considering there are so many beloved personalities from the show vying for screen time.
Indeed, Timothy. And let's not forget about some of the newer characters introduced in this. Films such as Bubbles the Dolphin and Plankton's muscle-bound alter ego, Super Evil Patrick. While they may have divided fans initially, I think both actors brought something unique to their roles. In fact, I personally found Bubbles' naivety and enthusiasm quite endearing, while super evil Patrick provided some much-needed comic relief with his bumbling antics.
That's a fair point, Tom. And it just goes to show how important casting is for films like this. You need actors who not only understand these characters, but can also bring something fresh and exciting to the table. It's clear that everyone involved in the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, put their heart and soul into bringing these beloved characters back to life on the big screen. And it definitely shows in the final product.
Unquestionably, Timothy. And speaking of the cultural impact of the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, I think it's worth noting how this film has managed to transcend its target audience and resonate with viewers of all ages. The blend of humor, action, and heartfelt moments makes it an extremely accessible movie for both children and adults alike. In fact, one could argue that the success of this film is partly due to its ability to appeal to multiple generations who all grew up watching SpongeBob SquarePants in one form or another.
That's a really interesting point you make there, Tom. I mean, just think about it. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, was released back in 2015, but even now, almost 7 years later, it still holds up incredibly well. And I believe that's largely due to the timeless themes and messages present in the film, such as friendship, courage, and the importance of embracing your individuality. These are themes that have resonated with audiences for decades and will continue to do so for many years to come.
I completely agree, Timothy. And it's not just the themes that make the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, such a memorable film. It's also how skillfully it integrates these messages into the overall narrative. For example, when Plankton initially decides to become a superhero in order to steal the Krabby Patty formula, he thinks all he needs is power and glory, but eventually he learns that true strength comes from working together with others who share your values. This is a powerful lesson not only for kids, but also for adults who might find themselves getting caught up in their own ambitions from time to time.
That's a fantastic point, Tom. And I think it just goes to show how important it is for filmmakers today, especially those working on family-friendly films like this one, to create stories that not only entertain, but also inspire and educate their audience members of all ages. With the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, they managed to achieve just that, creating a movie that's both fun-filled, adventure, and heartwarming tale about friendship and self-discovery.
Unquestionably, Tim. And speaking of the future, I can't help but wonder what direction the SpongeBob SquarePants franchise might take from here on out. With another feature film in development as well as an upcoming spin-off series centered around Patrick Star called The Patrick Star Show, it seems clear that this beloved universe is far from over. Personally, I'm excited to see what new stories and characters they will introduce while still staying true to the core values that made the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, such a resounding success.
That's very exciting news, Tom. It just goes to show how much staying power this franchise has. And I, for one, am looking forward to seeing what new adventures SpongeBob and his friends will embark on in the years to come. And with any luck, maybe we'll get another movie as well crafted and entertaining as the SpongeBob movie. Sponge Out of Water.
I couldn't agree more, Timothy. And speaking of which direction for this podcast do you think we should take tomorrow? Should we continue discussing other family-friendly films? Or maybe shift our focus to something completely different like anime travel shows or even food documentaries?
That's a great question, Tom. I think it would be interesting to explore some of the classics time travel films tomorrow. It can provide us with both entertainment and educational value at same time. Plus, who doesn't like a good road trip movie every now and again?
Well, Timothy, I couldn't agree more. Time travel is indeed an interesting topic to explore in film, and it offers plenty of opportunities for discussion on plot twists, character development, and historical accuracy. And who knows, might even stumble upon some underrated gems in the genre that our viewers have never heard of before. So, without further ado, let's wrap up today's discussion about the SpongeBob movie. Sponge out of water with a few final thoughts from both of us.
Thank you, Tom. So as we come to an end here, it's worth mentioning again how impressed I am by the overall execution of the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. It managed to strike a perfect balance between honoring its source material and introducing fresh elements that appeal to new audiences, something not many films can boast about these days. And let's not forget about those memorable pop culture references either. They were not only entertaining, but also added depth to the storytelling process, making it an even more enjoyable experience for both kids and adults alike.
Absolutely, Timothy. I couldn't agree more with your assessment of the SpongeBob movie. Sponge out of water. It truly is a testament to the power of great storytelling, memorable characters, and exceptional voice acting. And let's not forget about that incredible animation as well. It's no wonder. This film has stood the test of time since its release in 2015.
That's very true. Tom, as we wrap up our discussion on the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, I would like to express my gratitude towards everyone who watched and listened to us discuss this amazing film. It means the world to both Tom and that you have joined us on this journey through cinema history. So remember to comment, subscribe, and like our video if you enjoyed today's discussion as much as we did. And don't forget to tune in next time for another exciting episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights, where we will be exploring another classic or underrated film from various genres. Until then, take care, everyone, and happy viewing.